All right, Jesse on fire. Welcome back to the channel. All right, so we're going to do this big today. So I've got multiple topics that have nothing to do with each other, but that's what we do here now, right? I want to talk about Leon Edwards, Jorge Masvidal, Kamaru Usman, Burns, Tyron Woodley, and Colby. Not super in depth on those last two, but just the fact that they're there. And then I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to talk about the explosion in Beirut, which looked like a tactical nuke to me, which obviously they're saying is not what that is. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that is very clearly what it would look like if a tactical nuke had gone off, about a 5 kiloton one. I called the yield on that instantly. I mean, obviously, if you guys really follow the channel, I know about this stuff. And I've seen so many nuclear tests. The second that I saw that, I was like, that looks like a degraded suitcase nuke, like a degraded suitcase nuke that's yield has gone from 13 kilotons down to like 3 to 4, maybe 5. Which it turned out was exactly what they're estimating, was like 3 to 4 kilotons. Whether it was, they're saying it wasn't a nuclear bomb, but anyway, and then I'm going to go really crazy, and I'm going to talk about the George Floyd body cam video. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to talk, and if I've done it correctly, no one is going to get angry, okay? I don't care what side of the fence you're on that. No one's going to get angry because that's not what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the video, and if you... We're not doing the traditional kind of conversation that people do around that, all right? But I'm going to talk about that. And here's the deal that I'm going to make with you. If I do that successfully and do not make you angry, you have to subscribe to the channel, okay? Because anyone who can talk about the George Floyd incident, talk about it, for more than a couple minutes and not take a political position and you feel okay about what they said, that's worthy of subscription, I think. I think that is worthy of a follow and a ringing of the bell so that next time I want to talk about a hot button topic like every day, okay? So if you like the content, subscribe, ring the bell, all of those things. By the way, I'm probably not going to be able to do a video tomorrow because I'm going to be indisposed doing really important things that you guys might hear about later on. But fair warning, tomorrow I'm going to probably be off. So first of all, let's talk about Jorge Masvidal and Leon Edwards, all right? So that is the fight that is the most obvious matchup ever, right? Leon Edwards said, give me Jorge Masvidal. It's the only matchup that makes sense. Everyone else is taken. He's 100% right? You got Gilbert Burns fighting Kamaru Usman, and you got Tyron Woodley fighting Colby Covington, okay? Those are 4 of the top 6, and now you have Masvidal and Leon Edwards, who, by the way, have gotten in a street fight on video, okay? Obviously, that's the fight to make. Obviously. And I'm surprised I guess, Mossvadal just fought, but that is the fight that's going to happen, barring some fluke thing where Mossvadal gets scheduled with Conor, but, Dana said Conor's not fighting in 2020 anyway, so what other fight is there? Unless he wanted to fight Nate Diaz again, and that, again, seems unlikely. I would imagine he's going to fight Leon Edwards. So, yeah, that's an exciting fight. Everybody wants to see it, and it's, wow, you know what they should do? They should put that on the same card as the Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns card, right? And if I really wanted to go deep, I would say put all 3 of those matchups on the same card. But that seems a little bit unlikely because then you're going to waste a co-main event. Because, the bottom line is Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns, that's a main event, right? That's a main event fight. And... honestly, you might actually be looking at 3 co-main events in all honesty. I'm not sure if Kamaru Usman can headline a card yet. He probably can, though. I think Kamaru Usman's probably at a place now after the Mossvadal fight where he can headline a card. So you do Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns, and then you do Jorge Masvidal against Leon Edwards. It's hard. Masvidal's a superstar, but it's hard to have him headline a card absent a belt on the line at this point. He's not Conor, He's not, no one else besides Conor is there to headline a card absent a belt, right? So I think you put him in the co-main, and then the winner of the co-main fights the winner of the main. Because honestly, even if Kamaru Usman wins and Masvidal wins, which is exactly what I think. No, I'm sorry, that's not what I think is going to happen. I think Masvidal is going to win, and I think Burns is going to win. But simultaneously, if Usman does win, which could totally happen, obviously, Masvidal took that fight on 6 days' notice. That's an asterisk, right? So they can do that fight right afterwards. Masvidal wins decisively over Leon Edwards. Usman wins, they can make that fight. And if Gilbert Burns wins and Masvidal wins, boom. That's a big fight. That'll be a big fight because I think Gilbert Burns is going to really showcase how good he is in that Kamaru Usman fight. He knows him really, really well. I've said from the beginning, the fact that Kamaru Usman jumped camps instantly when that fight got announced, I think is potentially pretty telling. And he ran over to Trevor Whitman What's he known for? Is he known for being a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, phenom? Or is he known for being a wizard striking coach, right? So that to me tells me that Kamaru Usman knows he's at a disadvantage on the feet. And if that's the case, think about what it looks like on the ground with a world champion in jiu-jitsu, right? It is a terrible matchup for Usman. There's just no one that's going to convince me otherwise. Now, it seems like the secret's out now. Everyone is taking that up. Everyone's like, oh, Gilbert Burns might win that fight. It's like, well, yeah, either they've been watching my channel or it's just obvious. But yeah, and I think, with Mossvadal, I think Mossvadal beats Leon Edwards because I just don't see any part of Leon's game that is dominant versus the corresponding part of Masvidal's game. Like, Masvidal's a better striker. Leon Edwards has a tremendous straight cross, like a straight punch. His cross is awesome. He has a fantastic cross. But besides that, there's nothing that stands out as like something that Masvidal needs to be super concerned about on his feet. I certainly don't see him as on the level of Kamaru Usman in terms of wrestling. So what's he going to, I don't know. To me, it's one of those how's he going to win things. Because even if he catches him with that straight, he's not going to knock him out. So how does he win? How does he win? How does he win? So I think Masvidal wins pretty decisively in that fight, and then fights the winner there. And then Colby versus Tyron. That is such a weird matchup because if you would have asked me before Tyron's last two fights what Colby Covington's odds of beating Tyron Woodley were, and I would have been like 0. Like, I seriously thought that was the worst. I thought that was the most lock bet of all time was Tyron to beat Colby Covington. And now I'm like, geez, it kind of looks, not that it's a lock the other way, but like Colby puts constant pressure on guys, and that is exactly what Tyron Woodley has folded to both times. Now, what I saw in an interview though is Tyron Woodley was like, he's like Gilbert and Kamaru kind of goofy. He's like, I didn't have any animosity towards those guys. I really genuinely don't like Colby. There's two things that I want to note about that. Number one is I have always said that I think if Tyron Woodley does not like a guy, he's going to fight much better. Like, Tyron's one of those guys that fights better if he doesn't like a guy, and much worse if he does. But so let's say advantage Tyron there. Problem there, though, is if he's chalking up his last two losses to just not having animosity towards the guys, and he's not acknowledging that there are major gaps in his game that he needs to address because Colby will attack those exact same gaps, which happen to coincide with all of his strengths. If he's not even going to acknowledge that, then that's not a good sign for Tyron Woodley. So honestly, it's a really tough fight to predict who's going to win. Basically for those exact reasons. It's like he could be going in overconfident because he dislikes Colby, even though he should be more confident because he dislikes Colby. But from an X's and O's standpoint, he's gotten exposed in the last two fights, and Colby matches up perfectly with those exposed weaknesses. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, so now let's talk about this explosion in Beirut, because what on earth was that, right? Now, if you guys follow my channel, pretty closely, obviously I just did a video about nuclear weapons. Okay, so let me tell you exactly what I thought when I saw that the first time. I was like, that's what did I talk about? Suitcase nukes. And you know what I thought? I was like, that's a suitcase nuke. That's a degraded suitcase nuke. That looks like a suitcase nuclear weapon that was originally probably 10 to 15 kilotons and is degraded since whenever it was made in the 70s or 80s, and now had the yield of like 4 kilotons, right? I was like, that's a 4 kiloton nuclear explosion. Immediately afterwards, it was like, you got Trump saying it's a bomb, you got them saying it's an accident, then it's whatever. You can never tell what's going on. But what they did agree on is that the projected yield is basically exactly what I said. This is not like anything that anybody should be super impressed about. I've watched like every nuclear test ever. And, if you've watched the Baker shot and you can see how big 15 kilotons is, then you can compare it to that. And you're like, oh, that looks like it's about a third of the size.
2, 1, fire. حريق كبير في مرفأ بيروت. لا عذرا يا عذرا البناية يا عذرا. انفجار نووي.
لا هيدا كثير هيدا. لا اللي طلع كان خفيف الأول. فرقعات نارية. واو. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. What's that? What? 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 شو هاد؟ bro. صار في مدونة هلا وين؟ صار في مدونة على
The other thing is that, like, oh, you know, well, no, because there was this fire before. Like, it was, you know, there's fire before at the port, and then you see it blow up. And yeah, you can read that one of two ways. That is either that it's exactly what they said, that there was a fire that was started by blah blah blah, and then it went in, and they were housing all this nitroglycerin or whatever they said it was, you know, like an entire warehouse full of glycerine, and then totally possible, because that's the same type of explosive that was used in the Oklahoma City bombings. And what happened to Oklahoma City, he fit that entire bomb in a van, right? So imagine an entire warehouse full. It's possible, right? It is possible that's what happened. Simultaneously, if you know anything about tactics like that, okay? If you know anything about how tactics like that are done, there's an initial explosion or fire or something to bring eyeballs there, to bring people there, right? Like, so you have responders to the first one, and you have eyeballs, and then you have the real one, the huge one. And I mean, that is absolutely a very, very consistent terrorist tactic, which is, you know, the phase one is to get the eyeballs in the response, and then phase two is the big one. And that is exactly what happened here, okay? So, because what you want, if you're going to detonate an atomic bomb, or detonate a huge bomb, what you want, I mean, you're not, yeah, I mean, of course you want to kill as many people as possible if you're a terrorist, but what you really want is you want to inflict terror. Like, you want to scare people. You want there to be 100 different angles of the detonation, exactly like there were. And how do you make that happen? You have the initial thing that's a fire, so everybody's filming, and then boom. Now, let me ask you this. Hypothetically, okay, if that was a suitcase nuke, right? Like we talked about on my other one, the 90 missing suitcase nukes from Russia that we may or may not have had as the genesis for all the stuff we've done in the Middle East to try to go round all of them up over the last 20 years. Okay. Now, one part of that is 100% confirmed, which is that there are 90 suitcase nuclear weapons that have been missing since the late 90s from Russia. Now, whether or not that has been a driver behind things that we've done, operations in the Middle East, that's nothing confirmed about that, but definitely missing. Okay, so whether or not, that's a suitcase nuclear weapon or not, let's say hypothetically that it was, okay? Do you think that in the current 2020 environment that the world governments could allow that to be public knowledge? Like, let's say it was. Say it was a suitcase nuclear weapon. It got brought into the port. Very curious that it's in the port, too. Again, I'm not saying this is what it is, but I'm just saying it's in the port. Boom. Okay? We have a global pandemic. We have the entire world economy on the verge of utter meltdown. Beirut, worse off than everyone else. Do you think that a story that story would be acceptable if it was true? Do you think that, like, the world intelligence agencies would be like, yeah, let's just let everybody know that was a suitcase nuclear weapon? One of the 26 that we still haven't recovered. We're not really sure where the rest of them are, but yep, that's what that was. Does that seem like something they would let out? Because I don't think so. I think that would be something that you frantically needed to cover up. But again, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying if it were, you would need to cover it up, because that's not an acceptable story right now. It would literally be that could be the catalyst to really push us over the edge. I mean, not like everything else is not, isn't any of this stuff could be the catalyst to push us over the edge. But that is one thing that at this moment, not acceptable. Now, if it was that, please, God, don't let another one go off. Like if all of a sudden in some other city you get the same thing tomorrow. I mean, 2020, man. Anyway, so now switching gears. So 2020, so I think we got two things going on in 2020 that were like the biggest deals, biggest catalyst for things. And one is obviously the pandemic and the other is the George Floyd. Here's the deal. Here's how I want to talk about this particular subject. So I want to operate from a position that there are no evil people involved, okay? No one's a bad guy. Like there's no one who just is automatically a bad guy. I'm talking not the cop, and I'm talking not George Floyd, right? Because the narrative that I've been hearing on both sides is always assuming that there is someone who's operating from a place of being irredeemable, right? So there's no one who defends the cops, and I'm not going to do that either. But there's no one defending the cops. A lot of people defending George Floyd, but there are a lot of people who are like, this is a guy, about George Floyd, they're like, this is a guy who stuck a gun in the stomach of a pregnant woman. Okay, obviously that's not something you can defend, right? This is a guy who was a criminal. But what I'm saying is, let's just forget about all that, right? Let's actually just forget about any bad thing that anyone's ever done before, and let's just think about this through the lens of they're human beings, right? And the human being that you're looking at is going through something that you're watching, right? So if you can stop being a human for a second, like, a human that wants to project a bunch of anger and hatred on everything, and just think about what is actually happening and what the person is feeling at the time, then I think that people can actually objectively look at this and kind of go, damn, that's just really tragic and sad. And the main part that I'm talking about is this, like, so if you watch the video and you listen, because one of the things that I'd always said about George Floyd was how big he is. And I mean that from the framework of how challenging it must be to be that big and be in prison. Because most people think that, like, oh, if you're big, that's great because you're not going to get messed around with in prison, right? Like, people aren't going to fuck with you because you're big. Okay, well, guess what? Do they make the cells bigger? Like if you're a gigantic guy, yeah, that's cool. You're not going to get like gang raped. But I mean, space is relative, right? Like my living room is gigantic to a guinea pig. And to George Floyd, it would not be as gigantic, right? Be a hell of a lot more gigantic than his jail cell. But so like you get somebody who's 110 pounds and you put them in a cell, they have a lot more range of movement than a person who's 300 pounds and 6'5" or 6'6" or whatever George Floyd was. So that's what I always thought about when I was watching, because I made a video on TikTok. This is the most viral video I've ever done. It got like 7 million views or something. And what I talked about was I thought he was having a heart attack. And, when I really thought through what he must have been like experiencing, it's like I think he was so terrified to go to prison that he had like an anxiety attack and that started this medical condition that he was having to deal with. And after watching the body cam video, I think I was 100% correct on that, which is not surprising. This is kind of what I do. Because what did he keep saying? He kept calling, he made it out like he's talking about the police car, but he kept saying, I'm claustrophobic, I'm claustrophobic, I'm claustrophobic, I'm claustrophobic, I'm claustrophobic. That's what he kept saying. I've said this a million times to anybody that I've had a more extended conversation about George Floyd with. I've said exactly what I'm saying to you guys. A person who's that big in prison, that's like borderline torture. And I'm not saying that he doesn't deserve it, right? Like I'm not saying, you stick a gun on a pregnant woman, like you're going to have a hard time getting sympathy from me in terms of what your punishment is. But the punishment is not the same as it is for someone who is significantly smaller than he is, right? And I'm not getting into this race shit right now. Like I'm not like, it's just, this is not my point, right? Like I'm not like, the point is not to like go into the conversation the way that everybody else is. Okay. I'm not saying it's racist. I'm not saying it's not racist. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about him specifically saying I'm claustrophobic and me saying I knew that was why he was scared, because he's a gigantic human being and jails you get locked in a tiny space. Have you ever watched one of those shows that has like a documentary about like an international jail, Locked Up Abroad, or like a documentary about like a Filipino prison, Have you ever seen those cells, or those I don't even know if you would even call them cells, but it's like a punishment, and they put people in them and they're too small for them to stand, like they're so small they can't stand up, they can barely even sit up, like they're basically like this in there, and they're in there for days, weeks, months, like. And I mean, you want to talk about claustrophobic, like that idea gives me nightmares. Those things, those, like, you know, I'm mostly seeing those if I'm thinking about it in Asian jails, like in poor Asian jails. It looks like the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, it's like, you know, I had to get a what's it called? What do you, like, when you go inside MRI? Like, I had to get an MRI on my brain, like, or not on my, well, yeah, actually it was on my brain. I was fine, but I was getting these migraines out of the back, like, but anyway, so I had to get an MRI on my brain. And I went into that thing, and, you know, they're like, listen, so you can be really claustrophobic in there. Just yell if you need to get pulled out. I was like, oh, I'm good. Like, I'm fine, man. Don't worry about that. And I got in there and I flipped out. I mean, I flipped out. Like, I got it because it's not how small it is. It's that you can't get, I knew I couldn't get myself out. Like, I wouldn't, because you're kind of like bolted in. Like, if I wanted out, I couldn't get myself out. Like, I was relying on someone else to get me out of this thing. And I completely wigged out. I was like, get me out. I was like, get me out, get me out, get me out. You know, and he pulled me out, and I was like, wow, like, I was not expecting to have that reaction. And I ended up having to, because basically it's neither here nor there. Bottom line is, even me, who I didn't realize I was claustrophobic, got so claustrophobic that I had to have the guy pull me out. You know, obviously I was able to finish it, but, and you think about just that concept of claustrophobia, and then imagine being in prison, being that gigantic, and being there for years, like years, you know, years. You come out, you're in the day room, but then eventually you're going to get locked in that little tiny box every night. I mean, I just can't even imagine. It's horrifying to even think about. He's whacked out on fentanyl, he's whacked out on meth, and like, he has a total anxiety attack and wigs out. Now, so I'm trying to establish why he behaves the way that he does and why he feels the way that he does, which is totally understandable. Then you have the cops who are dealing with a gigantic dude, like a genuinely gigantic man who is freaking out and refuses to get into the cop car, you know. And again, I'm not defending the police at all, like, at all. There's no reason why he should have his knee on his neck. There's no reason he should have behaved the way that he did. It's just like, you know, it's just a shit situation, man. It's a shit situation. It's a shitty cop who, you know, is reacting to the situation very, very poorly, especially as a person who had as much experience as he did. Maybe he's racist, maybe he's not. But ultimately, what I saw in that body cam was just a tragedy. Simple as that. And all the, you know, all the nuance around it is kind of irrelevant. You know, like, when you really actually watch it and you're not looking at like a mural of a person, you're like, that's an actual dude, man. That's an actual human being who was really fucking scared. Like, he was really fucking scared. He's not faking that. You know, he's terrified. You think of a 6'6", 300-pound fucking ex-convict and, you know, scared, you know, terrified is not really the thing that you connect with if you can't see the up close and personal version of what was actually happening. And he was fucking scared, man. Genuinely fucking scared. And the cops are probably scared also, right? He's a gigantic man who is unpredictable, and he's really scared. It's just, again, tragic. It is a fucking tragedy. And what I don't like is I don't like people using tragedy to push ideas that they had before the tragedy, if that makes sense, right? Like, if you were a person who wants to deny that systemic racism exists or whatever, then using the body cam video to say, well, look, he was resisting arrest. Fuck you. You know? Like, and not because he wasn't, but because you're just projecting your own shit onto a tragedy. And people who want to say that it was racist, same answer, okay? There's nothing clear about the body cam video that says that it is racist or isn't racist. It just isn't. Like, it's not there. Believe me. If it were, I would be able to tell you, because this is what I do. I read people. There's nothing on that tape that's going to say whether or not this is a racist incident. It's just not. It's not there. And so if you are saying that you see that there, then what you're doing is you are projecting your own views onto something that you should just acknowledge is a fucking tragedy. Plain and simple. Those are my thoughts on that particular incident. So it's hard to watch. It's fucking awful, man. It made me sick. It's awful. 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 But anyway, so, and you know, the other thing too is like, when you think about that shooting in Atlanta afterwards, which seems a lot more cut and dry in terms of the police, you know, behavior, I would say. But like, you know, the guy who freaked out, grabs a taser, shoots it at the cop, runs away, whatever. Okay, so why does he do that? It's just a DUI stop. Why is he wigging out like that? It's because he just got out of jail. He's terrified of going back, you know? And again, that's not to excuse his behavior in any capacity. It's just to try to understand all the pieces on the chessboard. That people are they're behaving as human beings. Everyone involved, right? In my opinion, I don't think you can expect a police officer to watch a guy pull a taser off and then shoot it at your partner and you not, you know, react. And simultaneously, I can't throw stones at a guy who's blacked out drunk, who it just dawns on him like, holy shit, I'm going back to the box. I'm going back to hell on earth because I fell asleep at the wheel. I need to get the fuck out of here. And then you just wig out, and the second that you make a move, now you're trapped in it because now you've resisted arrest. Now it's do or die, and you got to just do anything you can to get away. It's just it's a fucking tragedy. It's a tragedy. And again, if anybody wants to go into the comments and argue with me about who's right and who's wrong, then you're not listening, because I'm not saying anyone's right or anyone's wrong. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a tragedy. And everybody should stop projecting their own shit on it. Plain and simple. That is my opinion on those things. So, if you want to tell me it's systemic racism, no one is disagreeing with you. If you want to tell me it isn't systemic racism, no one is disagreeing with you. Okay? I'm not making a statement on that. If you want to say it's a good shooting in Atlanta, cool, no one's disagreeing with you because I'm not making a statement. If you want to say it's a bad shoot, he shot him in the back, no one's disagreeing with you. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay? So like all the things that you see normal people arguing about these two things, it's not what I'm talking about. So save it. As a matter of fact, please don't do that. Let's not do that. Let's not do that. If you think that you can't comment on those things absent taking a position, then just save it. Just for now. You can talk about it some other place.